28a. And the yesterday's Gemara, we learned about we talked about the mitzvah of seeing one's Rebbe on Yom Tov, lahakol pnei rabbi, and Rebbe Eliezer's opinion that it's not exactly appropriate for everyone. It depends on the situation and how far the person is, if he can return in the same day. We talked about all the different discussions and the commentaries about the how you learn it from the pasuk. The pasuk seems to talk about Shabbos, Chodesh, not exactly about Yom Tov. But anyway, and the fact that the Rambam does mention this mitzvah, even though Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention it. So we spoke about the Noda B'Yehuda that talks about that. Or maybe there's no mitzvah to be makabel pnei rabbi. And then we had our own discussion. What does it mean, pnei rabbi? Who is a rabbi? We talked about maybe it could mean that it's someone who's a more of a leader type of individual, and rather than necessarily your personal Rebbe. Is it talking about someone who you learned a lot of Torah from, or most of your Torah? So these were some of the discussions of yesterday. And then we continued in the Gemara. The Gemara brought a brisa that talked about a story of Rabbi Eliezer that initially the Gemara thought that he spent the Shabbos of Sukkot at a place in the Galil Ha'elyon, the Upper Galilee, and was Yochanan Rebbe Eloi's Sukkah. And when he was there, they had a little issue because the sun was bothering. Well, the sun was starting to shine on them, and Yochanan Rebbe Eloi wanted to put some type of a protection from the sun, a sadin, some type of sheet that would block the sun. So he kept asking Rabbi Eliezer about, are you allowed to put it on top of the sukkah? Now, the simple understanding, the way Rashi learns it, is that this was an issue of Shaila about Hilchos Shabbos and Hilchos Yom Tov. You're not allowed to build binyan. Binyan is one of the 39 malachos, building. And although this is temporary, but it would be Yasser Midrabanon. Rabbinically, it would be prohibited to build a tent, build an oil. So this was a question that Yochanan wanted to put up this type of shade, but he was nervous that it might be considered binyan. And he asked Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer didn't really answer him. He just talked about he jumped to some other subject. He started talking about the shoftim, that every shofet each shevet was represented by one of the shoftim. Okay, they're not really connected. We don't see the connection. Then the sun was getting more uncomfortable. It was getting to half the sukkah was filled with sun, and he wanted to put this sadin up. And he asked again, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer again changed the subject, and he talked about the prophets, that every shevet was represented with a prophet. But in Yehuda ben Yamin, they were represented by a navi, a prophet, anointed the kings from their shvat. So they were all connected somehow to the prophets. So again, he changed the subject. So, okay. So then the sun was on the feet of Rabbi Eliezer. It was like already uncomfortable. And so Yochanan, Rabbi Eloi, what did he do? He took the sheet and he put it on. He didn't get an okay from Rabbi Eliezer, but he just did it. So Rabbi Eliezer took off. He put his cloak behind him. He threw it on his back, and he took off. And the understanding was he didn't want to make it look like he was giving up psak. He wasn't endorsing it. So the Gemara says, why did he keep changing the subject? Not because he didn't want to teach Torah. Didn't want to teach him any Torah. It wasn't that. It was that Rabbi Eliezer had some type of a policy. His policy was, I don't teach things that I didn't hear from my Rebbe. And his Rebbe was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he didn't hear anything from his Rebbe. So if he didn't hear something about this from his Rebbe, he wouldn't want to say it. He wouldn't want to say anything. The commentaries have a little issue because one of the commentaries brings, Sfasemis brings, that it says the same thing about Rabbi Yochanan, that he didn't say anything that he didn't do from his that he didn't hear from his Rebbe. But we know that Rabbi Yochanan was masakin many takonos. So how does how do you reconcile that? So the Sfasemis wants to say that this whole concept of not saying something that he didn't hear from his Rebbe was only in the lifetime of his Rebbe. But after his Rebbe passed away, he would say things that weren't from his Rebbe. So that's the way the Sfasemis understands this idea that he wouldn't say anything that he didn't hear from his Rebbe. Is more like a covered for his Rebbe, that he wouldn't possibly say anything unless he heard it clearly. What's interesting is that our Gemara, the case in our Gemara, the way Rashi learns it is that Rabbi Eliezer was really mesupik. He wasn't sure what to do in this case. So here it's interesting. You have an additional element here where Rabbi Eliezer was mesupik. So it gives off the impression, I'm just sharing with you a little thought. I don't have a source for this, but I'm sharing with you a thought that what it seems like is when Rabbi Eliezer could have clearly compared it to another case, no problem. But when it was an area where it deserves discerning and deciding if this is similar or not similar, that's where Rabbi Eliezer was. In other words, if he heard something from his Rebbe, he knew a halacha, and this case is almost the same type of case. So that's one thing. But this case was where you need to decide if you differentiate or not. There's room to look at it both ways. And because of that, this would be an area where you could understand that Rabbi Eliezer would not say something he didn't hear. He could have passed it on his own and made a decision. But because it was an area where he was himself masup, because it's an area that deserves shikol hadas, like you have to decide, you have to think and decide and make a decision. That's where he maybe was more careful not to give a psak. In other words, that's what you see in our Gemara. Maybe he also was careful in general, but in other words, this case is not a proof to translate the rule of Rabbi Eliezer as a blanket rule that he never gave any psukim unless he heard exactly that. Maybe he did give psukim that were similar, but in cases that you have to decide and decipher, that was where he's held back. He said, "I'm not gonna do that." Yeah, yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, isn't there another place in Gemara, maybe in Masechta Megillah, where somebody put off tried to put off the questioner?
I guess I'd have to go through Megillah again.
It had something. And I think like his first answer was something about not speaking while eating or something.
Oh, well, not speaking while eating is a Gemara Tainus.
So maybe
maybe that's where it is. That's right. The story of Yaakov Avinu Loy Mace, that Gemara
right.
there, like
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so maybe it was Tainus.
But does it say there that he wouldn't? It says over there that he pushed him off because he didn't want to
Right,
talk. He
right,
didn't want to choke on his food. Ein
right,
masichin besuda. Right.
right.
Him off. Yeah. Okay, shkoyach. Yeah, good memory. Yes, Victor.
So I'm just curious, is this a fact that he goes into talking about Shivatim and things that are so far away from the subject? Is that a standard way to hint that I don't want to paskin on this? In other words, the topic that we're talking about, and all of a sudden he starts talking about Shivatim and historical things and whatever. Is that? Do they explain that? How did he come to? How did he pick that topic of all topics to talk about?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. The commentaries do, of course, the Ben Yehoyada, the commentaries do try to find a connection. Maybe the Maharsha, and the Agadata element of it. It seems like there is some connection there between the question and the answer. One of the commentaries mentioned something to the effect of that he wanted him to make his own to paskin himself, like you see each navi had a shofet, and something along the lines of you should be able to paskin yourself, or give him encouragement to paskin himself. There is a little discussion about it.
Well, we see that's what happened in the end, right? He just
Yeah,
did.
exactly.
So that would make sense because that's what he did.
So the Aruch LaNer brings that number one, he was saying that even though for me, this could be a problem on Shabbos, Hilchos Shabbos, but according to the rabbis, they hold you moisef on an oyel arai on Shabbos, and therefore you would be allowed to. So he's sort of telling him that all the Yidden have shoftim, like you should go after the majority. So that's one way of understanding it. And the other one is what I told you, that you yourself have the ability to give a psak, to be a shofet. And then when he saw that he wasn't giving a psak himself, he didn't put the shade on. So then he said every shevet even has neviim, and even if you don't want to rely on your wisdom, but you should rely on your thoughts, because you're getting, you should be Hashem should be sending you some vision of what's appropriate and what's right. So something along those lines. That's the way the Aruch LaNer wants to explain it. So yeah, he has two. Basically, the first shot is that you go after the majority. The problem with that shot is then what's the next then what's the next time? What was he saying? And the second shot is that he was telling him that you should paskin yourself, and even if you can't paskin mitzad chachma, paskin mitzad nevuah. You should paskin from that Hashem is giving you a thought. You have a shaila. Hashem will give you what you should do from heaven. You're going to get should be considered like a navi. It's similar to a navius. Anyway, the Maharsha supposedly says a similar thing. Let's see if I could pull up the Maharsha here. It's don't ask me. Every shevet has a shofet, and you could ask mehem yesh lachem lishol. You could ask other people. You should ask someone else. And every shevet has a navi. No, he actually doesn't explain this. Anyway, so that's so it's in other words, you should ask ask someone else. Mehem yesh lachem lishol. You could ask any of the shoftim. Anyone else should know. That's the Marsha's understanding. Again, it answers the first time. The second one doesn't seem like it's explaining. Hey, there is another question on the second thing he told him. He says that even the Shvatim that don't have Nevi'im, but they have they have kings that were appointed by the Nevi'im. Problem is, Yehuda we know had Nevi'im. The tribe of Yehuda, it says, Amaitz, this is a Gemara Megillah, I think. Amaitz v'Amatzia Achem Hayu. The Amaitz and Amatzia were, so it says Yeshayahu ben Amaitz, and Amatzia was one of the kings. So you see, if they're brothers, then that means that Yeshaya was from the tribe of Yehuda. Because if Amatz and Amatzia were brothers, and one of them was a king, so then the other one, and that means the Yeshaya was from Yehuda, and therefore you see that there were Nevi'im in Yehuda. So you don't need to come to the fact that from Yehuda the kings were anointed by a Navi. Yehuda himself, that Navi, that tribe itself had Nevi'im. And so on that they say that the Gemara doesn't mean that Yehuda didn't have Nevi'im. It's just when it went, and it's mentioning that Binyamin we might not have had Nevi'im. But Binyamin had kings, so it also mentions, once it's mentioning that Binyamin had kings that were appointed by a Navi, so it mentions also, and Yehuda also had that as well. Now, it was not that Yehuda didn't have Nevi'im. Yehuda also had Nevi'im, and also had kings that were brought by Nevi'im. Binyamin was maybe that you need to emphasize, because we don't know of any Navi that was from Binyamin, but he did have kings that were appointed by the Nevi'im. Okay, so that was the other statement of Rabbi Eliezer.
Rabbi.
Yes, David.
Wasn't Shaul HaMelech from Binyamin?
That's right, king, but he wasn't a Navi.
Yeah, he was a Navi.
Oh, he was?
I thought he was.
Maybe Shmuel.
No, Shaul.
Shaul was a Navi?
Yeah.
So this Gemara sounds like that it's not aware of that.
Neither am I.
What's the story that Shaul was looking for his oxen, and he asked for his father's oxen. He asked Shmuel. Sounds like he needed to go to the Navi. Shaul.
I don't know. I thought there was a time where he was a Navi.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe, but our Gemara seems to imply that Binyamin did not have the VM.
Maybe I'm getting mixed up with something else. Sorry.
Okay. No. Welcome to the club of people who get mixed up. Okay. So so we have here that that Rabbi Eliezer did not end up paskening, and Yochanan ben Rabbi Loi ended up paskening and deciding that that's what's this is okay. So this is permissible. The Gemara asks that asks a few questions. First of all, Rabbi Eliezer himself, how did he even travel? Traveled on Shabbos of Sukkot. That doesn't seem to fit with his opinion. My answer, no, it was a different Yom Tov. It wasn't Sukkot. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? You're not supposed to leave your house on Yom Tov because you're supposed to be mesameach with your wife and your household. So the Gemara answers that it wasn't Yom Tov, it was Shabbos. So Shabbos, you could travel. So he went away for Shabbos. He was sitting in a sukkah, but it's not sukkah. It's just he happened to be sitting in a sukkah, and this was the story there. And he had this shiloh. So then the Gemara asks, what about Rabbi Eliezer's shita? Rabbi Eliezer holds that it talks about a pekak, which is some type of a board that you're using to close up a window. And the rule is that Rabbi Eliezer has some chumras. It has to be attached from before Yom Tov, from before Shabbos, and it has to be hanging because then it shows that it's part of this structure, and otherwise it would be a problem because it looks like it's like adding on to a binyan on Shabbos. But if it's hanging, it looks like it's attached. It's attached to it and it's hanging from it. You can see it's really part of it. So that would be permissible. So the rabbis permit you to do this, add this thing on Shabbos. But Poikigim by Benkach or Benkach. But Rabbi Eliezer had a shita that you have these two qualifications have to be met in order to do it. So you see that Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's usher. So the Gemara is asking that it's not, obviously if he passed in this way, maybe he heard it from his Rebbe, but once he's giving such psakim, he can give the psak in this case as well. It's the same psak. So the Gemara says it's not exactly the same case. And this is what Rabbi Eliezer was masupik about. That the case that Rabbi Eliezer talked about was where the board is going to be somewhat batil, it's going to be nullified to the structure. That would be more of a reason to prohibit it, because you're building onto a structure. Even if you're going to take it all off later, but it's still more of a building, more of a permanence. Even though you're taking it off later, it's more permanent than when you're just putting a sheet on something and that's really temporary. So this was the reason that it wasn't pasha to Rabbi Eliezer that this is called moisif, that this is called adding on to an oyel on Shabbos, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer was masupik, or at least there's room to differentiate between these cases, and Rabbi Eliezer refused to paskin because he didn't hear clearly about this law from his Rebbe. Okay, so now comes the next Gemara. We're on page Chaf Ches Amud Aleph 28a, and we're going to start with the Tanu Rabbanon. The rabbis taught in a brisa, 2 lines from the top of the page on 28a. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught in a brisa, Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer. There's a story with Rabbi Eliezer Sheshavas B'Gola Elyon, that he spent Shabbos, rested in this Galil Elyon in the Upper Galilee. Usha'aluhu shloishim halachos b'hilchos Sukkah. They asked him 30 shilas on Hilchos Sukkah. In Hilchos Sukkah. Shtei mesrei amalam shemaiti. 12 of them, he said, I've heard. And Shmoina Elisar, 18 of them, Amalam Leishamaiti, said, I didn't hear. Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda mechilaf hadvarim. Rabbi Yehuda says it was the opposite. It was 18. Shmoina also Amalam Shamaiti, 18 he heard. Shtei Mesrei Amalam Leishamaiti, and 12 he didn't hear. So Amru Loi, so the people who asked these shilas to him, they said to the people who were asking these shilas, so they said to him, Kol dvarecha einon elo mipi hashmua. Well, who cares? You heard these, you didn't hear these. We want your psak. We don't care what you heard from others, what you decide yourself. All your things, you only want to share what you heard. You're not going to say anything of your own. So Amar Lahem, so he told them, his kaktuni, you are causing me, you are obligating me, Loimar, to say davar shaloi shamati mipi rabbeisai, something that I didn't hear from my rebbeim. What does that mean? That you're forcing me to tell you about my policies. I have certain policies, and you are making me say them. And these are things. These policies are not things. I didn't hear my rebbe say my policies. My rebbe didn't give me all of these policies. I've made up my own policies. Maybe individually, I heard them from my rebbeim, separate occasions. But I made this list of policies that I have, and you are causing me to have to share them. I'm not comfortable with this, but I'm going to have to tell you, I don't normally share things that I didn't hear, but I'm going to share with you this list of policies that I follow. Miyamai, from all my days, from my early days, loy, or from all my days of my life, loy kidmani adam bebeis hamedrash. No one ever went earlier than me to the base medrash. I was always the first. But loy yoshanti bebeis hamedrash, and I never slept in the base medrash. Loy shinas kvav, loy shinas arei, not a permanent sleep and not a temporary sleep. Now, are you allowed to sleep in the base medrash, permanent, temporary? So in Shulchan Aruch, it does mention that in Shulchan Aruch it mentions that, at least the way Mishnah Berurah understands it, and based on it brings Rishonim, that you would be allowed to sleep. Talmud Chacham is allowed to sleep even permanently in a base medrash. Regular person shouldn't, but a Talmud Chacham would be allowed to, and nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that he never did this, even though he would be allowed to. Not a permanent sleep, not a temporary sleep. And I never left anyone in the base medrash and went out and left them there. I always left last. And I never talked the sichas chulin. Now, sichas chulin normally is translated as just mundane talk. Rashi learns over here that it means divrei havoyu schoik. It's not just mundane talk, it's talk of frivolous talk, laughter. So that's the way Rashi seems to learn, that he never spoke a sichas chulin. And I never said something that I didn't hear from my Rebbe in my whole life. So what he's basically saying is that it's not that maybe I missed out in some type of, I was on vacation. I missed out when the Rebbe was talking about these halachas. I skipped that day in school. No, I was always there first. I was always there last. I never slept in the base medrash, and therefore I was quite aware of every shiloh that came in. And still, there were some shilas. These shilas never came up, and therefore, I'm not going to give you the answer. I don't share answers with the matters that I never heard from my Rebbe. And it's probable that my Rebbe never pasked this shilah, because I would have heard it. And this is my policy. So it's not just that I might have missed out in this shilah, but my Rebbe once passed. No, probably my Rebbe never passed in these shilas. And anyway, my policy is that I can't answer you anything that I didn't hear. So this is this is Rabbi Eliezer's sort of continuation of what we saw in the previous case, where he didn't want to answer. He didn't give an answer when he didn't know. He didn't have a teaching from his Rebbe. Next Gemara. Amru alav al Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They said about him, about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. This is Rabbi Eliezer's Rebbe. And they said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, meyoma, from all his days, he never spoke mundane talk. He never walked dalet amos. He never walked 4 cubits without learning Torah. Without tefillin. He always had tefillin on, and he always had Torah on his mind. He always had tefillin or Torah, and Veloi Kadmai Adam Beis Medrash. No one ever went earlier than him to the Beis Medrash, and he was always the first. But Yoshan Beis Medrash Leishinas Kevav Leishinas Ari never slept. Permanent sleep or temporary sleep, like here, but voice hamatunafis. He never would think about Torah on a mavoy, an alley that was dirty. And even though in Gemara Brachas we learned that Rabbi Yochanan and there's other Tanoim, there's the Brisa that mentions this as well there, that the halacha doesn't follow it, but Rabbi Yochanan holds that you're allowed to speak divrei Torah in a mavoi that's dirty, as long as you're walking through it and you put your hand over your mouth. Now, you can't stop there, but you could walk through and you put your hand over your mouth, so you have a separation between the Torah and the dirtiness of the alley. Would be, according to him, you were allowed to do such a thing. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was machmir not to think of divrei Torah even though it was permissible. So, and which is the halacha that you're not supposed to. But he held that you were allowed to, and still he wanted to be machmir, and he wouldn't do it. And he never left anyone in the Beis Medrash, and he went out. He would always stay last. No one ever saw him sitting and being quiet. He was always learning. They bring down that this means that that they didn't see him quiet, meaning even when he would think divrei Torah, he would always say it. There's an Indian to speak, to say divrei Torah, and that you don't forget it through learning. And he would always, it would never look like he was just thinking. He was always saying things with his mouth, and which is supposed to be beneficial, not to forget Torah. Now, he also says that v'lei pasach adam deles l'talmidov elohu be'atzmo. He always was the one who opened the door for his students. And different understandings of what this means. Either he didn't want to have a guard there who would take money and charge, or he wanted to take away any of the jealousy and bittul Torah that some would open the door for others. So he made sure to just open it for everyone, all the students. So there wasn't any jealousy. Someone this guy, you don't hold the door for me, or whatever it was, you hold it for him, you don't hold it for whatever it was. He would make sure he would sit right by the door, and he would take away the jealousy by opening the door for everyone, for all the students. Says about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that he also didn't say things that he didn't hear from his Rebbe. And he never said that the time has come that we have to leave the Beis Medrash, except Erev Pesach and Erev Yom Kippurim. Rashi says Erev Pesach that they would make the Korban Pesach, and the children they shouldn't fall asleep at the Seder. So he would help. He would, the the scholars would go home to make sure that the kids would go to sleep on Erev Pesach, and this way they would stay up for the night for the Seder. So he did. So that's when he would announce. He would say, "It's time to leave the Beis Medrash." They have to make the Korban Pesach. They had to bring the sacrifice, and then they make sure that the kids went to sleep so that they would be awake for the Seder. Yom Kippurim, in Erev Yom Kippur, that there's a mitzvah to eat during the day, and therefore they would leave the Beis Medrash in order to eat. And here again, the Gemara just says that Rabbi Eliezer followed after him in all these hanhagos, all of these things. It's interesting because they would say this about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai never really made this list. Because if he had made this list, then Rabbi Eliezer would have had no problem repeating it. But he didn't really like that. The people said this about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai himself never made this list of policies, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer was uncomfortable repeating it as if this is the list of policies that he understood this about Rabbi Yochanan. He never heard Rabbi Yochanan say that he would do these things. So therefore, he really didn't even want to repeat this because he didn't really hear it straight from his Rebbe. But but anyway, that's what he did end up explaining it to the group when he was in Galil HaElyon because they pressed him, they pressured him. Okay, so now comes the next Gemara. Tano Rabbanon. The rabbis taught in a brisa, Shmoinim Talmidim Hayuloi LeHillel HaZakin. Hillel HaZakin had 80 students. 30 of them were fit that the Shechina could rest upon them like Moshe Rabbeinu. That's interesting that it uses that term, like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's a very surprising term because we know that like Kam Navi Yisrael Moshe. So some erase it. It can't be like Moshe. They were fit to have Shechina, but not like Moshe Rabbeinu. The commentaries say not that they did have the Shechina, not that they were prophets, but they were fit to be prophets. And because of the Ovain Hadar, the Anshe Hadar, because of the community, the people of the generation, they didn't merit it, but they should have. They were fit to have it, but they couldn't. Now, the other commentaries say it doesn't mean that they were Nevi'im. Shechina and Nevi'im are two separate things. So it's not a contradiction. You could say they could merit to have the Shechina like Moshe Rabbeinu, but not to have Nevi'os like Moshe Rabbeinu. In any event, he had 30 of them were quite holy. Ushloisha mehen, and 30 of them ruyan shetamidam chama ki Yeshua ben Nun. They were fit to have the sun stop in the sky like Yeshua ben Nun when they were fighting the war against those armies that were fighting the Gevinim. All the I think it was 5 armies fighting the Gevinim, and the Yidden helped out, and ultimately Yeshua needed more time to win the war, and the sun was going to set, and Yeshua wanted to finish it up. The sun stayed so they could finish and win the war, and till the end of the war. That's the whole machlokes, how long the sun stayed, didn't set, but the whole world talked about it. Shemesh begivain daim biyareach beimek ayolin, right? Famous story. And the day that actually happened was Gimel Tammuz, the 3rd day of Tammuz. It says it was that the sun never set. So that was the story of Yeshua, and 30 of these students of Hillel Zaken were capable, they were fit, that a miracle like that that could be done for them. And then it says the Esrim, Beinin, 20 of them were in between these two levels. That they were in between. So who was greater? The ones that could have the Shechina like Moshe Rabbeinu, or the ones that could have the miracle of Yoshua? Which ones are the greater ones?
You would always think Moshe would be the highest, right?
Right.
But these ones in the middle, that's even more confusing. Because
they were greater than the ones who could be like Yoshua, that could stop the sun, but they weren't as great as the other 30 who were like Moshe Rabbeinu.
But you would be surprised. I'm surprising that Yehoshua isn't in that upper 20. In other words, it's something is surprising about the fact that Yehoshua isn't. You think he'd be higher than the 30 that are that could do what he could do.
Right. I don't know that the Gemara is saying that they were on the level of Yoshua ben Nun's greatness. Maybe Yoshua ben Nun could have done much more than that. It's this miracle that was done by Yoshua ben Nun. They were fitting that they could also have that type of miracle done. Now, was Yoshua ben Nun greater than that? And he was much more, even on a higher level than these 30? Probably. You know what I mean? Just like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was on the same level as these 30? No, Moshe Rabbeinu was much greater. But regarding the Shechina, they were similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. Regarding the miracle of the sun, they were similar to Yoshua ben Nun, that they could have stopped the sun. But it doesn't. I don't know if it means that Yoshua ben Nun would not have been greater than these than the 30, and even greater than the 20. 20 were Beinanim. They were in between. Amru, I'm sorry. Gadol Shebakulon, Yonasan ben Uziel. The greatest of them was Yonasan ben Uziel. Many people are familiar with Yonasan ben Uziel, his grave, because it's in Amukah, right outside of Tzfas. Many people go there before they're looking for a shidduch. It's a big segula to get to find a shidduch when you go there. And they say, I think within 6 months or within a year, you're guaranteed. Or it's definitely a segula. Definitely, it's a strong segula. I've seen it work.
Yeah.
The Katan Shebakulan, the smallest of all of the students, was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. It was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who at least as we know, is one of the greatest. But he was the smallest of the students of Hillel Hazaki.
Is it this? Here it says he was the youngest.
Aha.
Maybe that's why he's still alive with it.
It wouldn't make any sense if he was the youngest. They're talking about the greatness of the others. So here Katan probably means exactly what the rabbi said, that he was the least of all of these people, not the youngest.
There is a question on this Gemara. Thank you, Ezra. It does sound a little surprising to say that it's talking about age. We're not dealing, like, why would it mention age? But that sounds surprising. But on the other hand, there is another issue. Who actually took over Hillel Hazaki? Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. So how can you say that he was the Katan Shebakulon He was the least of all of them, yet he's the one who took over the Nesius, the leadership of Hillel Zaken. It sounds a little surprising. So that is a question how to explain it. So the Kesef Mishnah says it must mean that he was the Katan Shevakulan in secular knowledge. He was the least of them in all the other areas of. In other words, we'll soon see in the next. But let's learn the next piece, and then come back to this idea. So the next Gemara says, Amru Olav al Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shlahiniach Mikro Mishnah Gemara, that he never left. He didn't miss out on a Mikra Chumash Mishnah, a teaching of the Tanoim, Gemara, the Amirah, the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a Tana, but the Gemara means the understanding and comparison, comparing different Mishnayos to each other, understanding the reasons behind it. Halachos, the laws that were given to Moshe at Har Sinai, Agodos, the Agadic teachings. He didn't miss out on any of these things. Dikduke Torah, the Dikdukim, which are the letters that are in the Torah that are extra. Some as we saw about Sukkahs, right, that had spelled without the vavs, and sometimes it adds a vav and things like that. The oisios, the letters in the Torah, Dikduke Torah, the ribuy ois. Rashi says ribuye oisios shabon lidresh ben ribuyin mutin, and like it says, Ezrach lohitzi hanoshim. He says, Shadiktika Torah b'lashon luchtiv ois yisera lalami. So Rashi says that that sometimes the Torah adds an extra letter. The Dikduke Torah is sometimes you learn a riboy and a miut from different letters of the Torah that are that you could darshan from. So maybe it doesn't mean the letters of like the actual letters. The when it's a chaser or a yasser, it means that it's a riboy and when there's an extra letter that teaches a halacha of a riboy. Well, I guess the vavs also do that as well. Yeah, but Rashi's example is like ha'ezrach, which teaches us about women, if they're obligated or they're not obligated, which will soon the exclusion of women, which we'll see later in the Gemara on the same page, but it's later on. And besides Dikduke Torah, Dikduke Seifrim are the Gzeiros, the rabbinic decrees, Dikduke Seifrim, and Kalim, Vachamurim, Kavachaimer, Gzeiros Shavos, and the Gzeiros Shavos to Kufais. He knew all about the way the sun and the moon, the constellations, the gematrios. He knew all the numerical different gematrios and numerical values, and which are learned from things that are learned from gematrios, atbash, different ways of exchanging the letters, and the calculations of the letters. Certain halachas are learned from them. He learned all of these in Yanim. Sichas malachi ashares. He knew about the talk of the angels. The sichas shindalids. The sicha of the talk of the demons. Sichas dekolim. And he also knew about the talk of the decals. The literally it means. The decal is a palm tree. What do you say?
Palm tree, yeah.
Palm tree. The palm trees, which Rashi says, I don't know what that means. The talk of the palm trees. Rashi says, I'm not sure. Lo yadana mai. I mean, Rashi says it also about the sichas malachim. Rashi says it about sichas malachi ashore, sichas shindalad, and sichas dekolim lo yadina maihi. but it seems that
Sounds like some kind of Kabbalah stuff. I don't know.
yeah, I mean,
The conversations of
Leah Dynamite. That's Rashi over there. I don't know what it's referring to. But I have a little letter there, but I don't see where it goes to. Interesting.
Rabbi, wouldn't the when they're talking about the palm trees, I mean, when the wind goes through the palm trees, the palm
Right.
tree
Correct.
moved, and so he perhaps was able to understand what that meant.
Every time the wind blows, that in other words, the fact that the palm tree moves, there's some message. The commentaries do talk a little about what it refers to. Anyway, but maybe we'll talk tomorrow about it. But one of them does mention about the way they move with the wind. Rav Hai Goin Rajba brings such a thing. Other commentaries mention different things about it, but Ritva. Okay, maybe we'll talk tomorrow about that. So there's the Sikha, the talk of the angels, the talk of the demons, the talk of the Kalim, Mishlois Koibsin, or Mishalois Koibsin, Mishalois Shualim, the parables that are said by about the Koives, the talk that they talk about the parables that are about the washers and the foxes. Shualim. Davar Gadol, the Davar Koton. And then you would know also about never missed out on Davar Gadol's, big things and small things. Davar Gadol, Davar Koton. And what is this? So Davar Gadol is Maisim or Kava. This is the things that happen with the chariot talked about in Ezekiel, the chariot of Hashem, that he understood that. Davar Koton, Hainu, Davar Koton, Havayos, Davar Koton is the Havayos, the questions, the dilemmas of Abaye and Rava. So these are the things that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knew all of these fields. So when it says he was the Koton Shebakulon, Kesef Mishnah in the previous Gemara wants to say that it meant that he was the Koton Shebakulon in like these other areas, not in learning, but in these other areas of Shar Chochmas, that maybe the other students were greater than. That's what it means, Koton Shebakulon.
So it lends possible proof that means that he was the youngest. Because if he knew all this stuff, he couldn't have been the smallest in wisdom. It had to be in age, you would think.
I don't know if that would be any proof at all, because what he's saying is he actually didn't know as much. I mean, I mean, first of all, you never know.
Age
means nothing. Age means nothing. I mean, someone could know a lot, could know a little. I don't know if it's you can prove anything from the age, from how much they know. Anyway, but in any event, Lakaye Mashanemar, that about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it's to fulfill what it says, Lahanchel Oya Vayesh, V'itresehem Amalek, that I to bequeath, to give a nachal, an inheritance to my loved ones, Yesh, which is either these 310 worlds, V'itresehem Amale, because their oitzreis are filled, their oitzresehem, their treasure houses, their storage houses are filled with Torah. There is that's one way of explaining it. That to give him, in other words, Hashem is going to give great reward because of those that are filled with Torah and because of their Oitzrei Sehem Amalek. Now it says Shekoton Katan Shebukulan Kach, if this is the smallest one, was this great? Godol Shebukulan Alachas Kama Bakama. Can imagine how great the greatest one was, Yonasan ben Uziel. Amru Olav al Yonasan ben Uziel. They said about him, about Yonasan ben Uziel, the Shah Sheyoshev Isaac with Torah, when he would be toiling in Torah, sitting and toiling in Torah. Any bird that would fly above him, it would be burned right away. And Rashi says because the angels would gather around him to hear divrei Torah from his mouth, and the angels were made of fire. So Rashi doesn't say that, but that's there is such a pshat that the angels are fiery, and any bird that would come, they would be burnt up. And
those are the seraphim.
What was that?
The angels who are of fire are the seraphim.
The seraphim.
Yeah.
Well, no, the seraphim would be burnt, would end up burning up with love to Hashem. But I don't know if that's the only fire that we talk about when there's angels. But
so what they're not saying is that there was a big change. There's a big change. That's what I think the summation of it is. And the people who came before, that we know them in pairs. So right, and Hillel and Shammai, right? We know them in pairs. But after that,
Lugais.
Right, we don't have pairs. So there's some kind of depletion because there's a great influence and cross-fertilization when you have pairs, and even if they disagree. So it's very special. And we had a whole list of them. And then after that is just one man, and he is responsible for teaching all the other people from that generation. There was a recent movie that we showed here, and I think it's very popular now, to show what happened during the period when the Romans were besieging Jerusalem, and about the different parties of people who were involved. And they have Yochanan ben Zakkai, they show him always alone answering questions for people, and then of course going to speak to the Caesar. So
what are you saying, that he had a harder time and yet he reached such levels? Is that what you're saying? Like in other words, it wasn't as easy for him to reach.
Everything was dependent on him after that. Everything was dependent on him because
he didn't really have a colleague to share his Torah with. That's
the ideal is to have two, right? A chavrusa, right? And he unfortunately did not, and he had to therefore take the responsibility to be the political person as well as the Torah person.
That's a very interesting insight, and that's your own observation, or you've seen this discussed?
No, but a lot of things we do, we say that it's because of Yochanan ben Zakkai, and then he tells you
he made a lot of takanas. That's true. He made a lot of takanas, but you're adding that there was no one in his league in his generation, and he didn't have like a nasi and an av bezdin that time, like to be
correct.
And,
so it's sort of like you don't have support. You don't have somebody else to consult with. You always.
I hear what you're saying. I was just wondering if you sort of
list in the Pirkei Avos, it tells you a lot and tells you the Zukkos,
right.
But then
it stops.
Then
the Zukkos stop.
It says he, and then it says he had 5 great students.
Yeah.
Right, and so it's sort of a reversal. They were influencing one another, but now he has to take all the responsibility. That's all. I think
it's definitely an interesting observation. In other words, you don't necessarily learn it that way, that the two great leaders, they lived near each other and that they spoke and learning to each other and so on a regular basis. It doesn't necessarily mean that way, but that's definitely possible that, that's the way it was. Of course, Hillel and Shammai, we hear all the time that they debate, that, their discussions, or at least their students, most of the arguments are really their students. We do know that they had a lot of dialogue, which But and then I guess you would say the same thing about Rabbi Yochanan's students. But what you're saying is Rabbi Yochanan himself didn't really have that. That's it's an interesting observation. All right. Anyway, we want to take up more of your time. Zeigazont,
Rabbi.
everyone. Yes.
Rabbi.
Sukkah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah,
Just
you're welcome.
anything further you said about Yonason
Right.
ben Uziel. He's the one that they davened for shidduch.
Yeah.
So he didn't get married.
Now that's a good question. I have to look up the story why it's a segula. Well, I don't know the whole story of why is it a segula to daven at his kever to get married.
I think because he asked in order to make a kapara for the fact that he felt that learning Torah was greater than getting married, and therefore he asked that this should be a kapara that
Maybe.
should be. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I don't remember. Yeah, maybe.
Thank
Maybe
you,
someone else.
Rabbi.
Okay. Zeigazont, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Kol tov.